Okay, today 5.4, we're working with half angle formulas. So make sure you have your formula sheet out once again today, and let's get started, get you guys moving. Okay, so we have cosine A equals 3/5 with A between 270 degrees and 360 degrees. So we need to find sine of A over 2. Well, right away I'm going to tell you to pull out your formula sheet and find sine of A over 2. Let's write that right beside it. So we have that is equal to the square root of 1 minus cosine of A all over what? 2. Now, a little bit different than what we've been working with before. Well, right away I'm going to tell you, don't forget the plus and minus, because we're going to be working with a bunch of different things today that's going to predict whether or not you have a question right or wrong. Okay? Well, right off the bat, we know that A is in this field right here. Well, we're working with half of that. So we have A over 2. Well, what's half of 207? 135. And then what's half of 360 is 180. So we're actually going to be in quadrant, what is that? 2, right? Quadrant 2. Okay? So once we do that, now we know what we're kind of looking for. So we're going to evaluate our equation. So we have 1 minus, don't forget the plus and minus, like forgetting your pants in the morning. This doesn't work very good. So 1 minus cosine A, which is 3/5, all over 2. Well, that's going to be the square root, plus or minus the square root of 2/5 all over 2, which is 2 over 1. Well, if you actually simplify that fraction, all those fractions going on there, you get the square root of 1 over 5, which is equal to the square root of 5 over 5. Well, like I said, we have pluses and minuses out here. So how do we know if it's the positive one or the negative one? Look at the quadrant it's in, and then what we're working with. We're working with sine. So if I draw my crosshairs and we have an angle in this quadrant, well, we know sine is positive in that quadrant. So our answer is going to be positive. So positive square root of 5 over 5. You don't need the positive, but I'm just using it to kind of show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to be doing for this entire lesson. Now, the next one. So right away we know that we have cosine A is equal to 3/5, and that's in quadrant, what quadrant is this? Quadrant 4. So we need to find cosine A over 2. Right away once again, okay, cosine A over 2 is the square root, so plus or minus, the square root of 1 plus cosine of A. That's over 2 again. Well, now we're thinking, okay, I need half the angle of what cosine A was. So we're going to do A over 2 again. So half of 360 is 180. Half of 270 is 135. And that's less than, so we're in quadrant 2 again. Now we can just plug in what we know, just using our formula. So plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine A, which is 3/5, all over 2. Okay, so now we're going to get to plus or minus, after doing the math, the square root of 4/5 which is equal to plus or minus the square root of, or 2 square roots of 5 over 5. Stop, wait, what are you doing, Mr. K? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it does. Remember, we have the 4 here. The square root of that is 2. That's where we get this 2. And then I don't like radicals in the bottom of a fraction, so I just multiplied the bottom of the fraction by the square root of 5. So that's why now we have 5 in the denominator and square root of 5 in the numerator. Well, now we need to look at, okay, we're trying to find cosine of 2a, or a over 2, which we're in quadrant, what quadrant are we in? 2, so that's going to be negative. Cosine is negative in quadrant 2, so our answer is negative square root of 2 times 5 over 5. Okay. Now let's go to the next one. Cosine A, 3/5 again. So we're kind of working in the same areas, but now we have tangent A over 2. Well, go right to the formula. Need a drink of water or something here. Tangent A over 2 is equal to 1 minus cosine A over sine A. Not dealing with any radicals in this one, so it's not all bad. Well, we know we need sine, we have cosine, so we're going to draw our cosine A to find our sine A. So draw my crosshairs. We're in quadrant, which quadrant is this? Quadrant 4, so I'm going to go boom, boom, boom. Well, cosine is over 3, and then the hypotenuse is 5. Well, this is that famous triangle we always talk about, 3, 4, 5, so this is going to be a negative 4. Okay, so now I can find my sine A, which is equal to negative 4/5. Now it's just plug it in, plug it in. Okay, so now we have 1 minus cosine A, which is 3/5, all over sine A, which is negative 4/5, which is equal to 2/5, all over negative 4/5. It ends up simplifying out to negative 1/2. Awesome, let's keep going. Take a let's move. Okay, next question, number 4. Got a lot going on in this one. So we have to find 6 trig functions of A over 2. Well, right away I'm thinking to myself, geez, this is going to be a lot. So give yourself some space here. I'm going to start over here on the side. Well, we have cosine of A over 2. Well, that is equal to plus or minus the square root of cosine. So we have 1 plus, we don't have cosine of it, so we need to find that. All over 2. So we know cosine of A has to go in there. And then, so let's just find that right away, just so we know what we're looking for, what we're using, and we can just start plugging away and finding our answers. So we're going to look at sine A again. We're in quadrant, which one now? 3. Quadrant 3 this is. Okay, so we're going to be over here. Well, we need a sine of negative 12. Or I should say the opposite, negative 12 and then 13. And then all we're going to have left, well, we know 12 squared is 144, and 13 squared is 169. The difference between those two is 25, so I'm going to put 5, that's going to be negative. So cosine A is equal to negative 5/13. So negative 5/13. Okay. Which is equal to, if you do the math, plus or minus the square root of 4 over 13, which is equal to negative 2 square root 13 over 13. And you're saying, how do you know it's negative? Well, remember, we're looking at the half angle now, so we have a over 2. I should have done this right away. A over 2 is less than half of 270 is 135, and half of 180 is 90. So we're in quadrant 2, okay? Again, and since we're working with cosine in quadrant 2, it should be negative. Now let's do sine right away. Let's do sine. So sine of a over 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 minus, now we need a sine a, so it's going to be a minus 12 over 13. And that's all over what? 2. Do the math on the inside now. You get that to be plus or minus the square root of sorry about that, 20, so it's going to be the square root of 25 over 26. That was a weird looking 26 as it started out. So this is going to be the square root of all that. So now we're going to, once you simplify that, it comes to plus or minus 5 square root of 26 over 26. Now we're working in quadrant 2 and we're in sine, so we know it needs to be positive, so I'm going to erase that negative out there. So 5 times the square root of 26 over 26. Now tangent. Tangent is a little bit different once again, so tangent a over 2 is equal to 1 minus cosine, which is negative 5/13, all over sine, which is negative 12/13. And that reduces to 18 over 13 all over negative 12 over 13, which is equal to negative 3/2. You know, there's a little bit of a trick to use when looking at secant. Secant a over 2 is just equal to 13. I mean, the negative up there is no negative up there, even though it stays with 2 square root 13. So if you were to multiply this, it's going to be, notice how we just took the reciprocal there. Negative 13 square root 13 all over 26, which is equal to 1/2 square root. And then cosecant a over 2, once again, is the reciprocal of that. So it's going to be 26 over 5 square root 26. So, which is equal to 26 for 26, and then 5 times 26 is what? Like I said, we'll find that by 26. 26. So we're going to get 5 times 26, which, let's see, 5 times 25 is 125, so add another 5 onto that, so 130. 130. And I know 26 is prime, so I'm gonna leave it at that. And then cotangent is just the reciprocal of tangent. So that equals negative 2/3. Okay, so those are pretty quick, finding those last ones. Okay, let's go to the next page now. Okay, so now we need to find tangent 15 using the half angle identity. Well, we know tangent 15 is equal to sine 30 degrees over 1 plus cosine 30 degrees. Mainly because tangent 15 is really, let's see, 15 times 2 gets me 30. Well, 30 divided by 2 gets me 15. That's how I got that. So we know that is equal to what? Sine of 30. You should be thinking back to your unit circle now and saying to yourself, okay, I know sine of 30, which is 1/2 all over 1 plus the square root of 3 over 2. And that's going to simplify to 2 minus the square root of 3 all over 1. So this is your answer. Yeah, I'm skipping quite a few steps here with just the the multiplication, addition, subtraction, just so we can keep moving. I don't want to bury you in the algorithms and all the work that it takes to do them. After a while, it'll become second nature to you. Okay, this is the last one right here. Okay, stick with me now. This one I'll work all the way through just because it's a little complicated. Well, right now we know we need to get sine squared of x over 2. So that's the sine of the half angle formula. So 1 minus cosine x over 2. And that's squared. But remember, we have a squared here. So that's squared. We need to get to 1 minus cosine x over 2. Okay, so that's what our goal is. Well, right away I see tangent and sine. Well, we want to get everything in terms of sine. So I'm going to change tangent to sine over cosine in both cases. So sine x over cosine x minus sine x. I know that's over 1. I'm just going to write that so we see that we have to find like the denominators in order to add. And then 2 times sine x over cosine x. Okay. Here's where it starts getting a little bit tricky. Like I said, we need to have common denominators. So we have sine x. If we get common denominators, we get sine x minus sine x cosine x all over cosine, because that would be our common denominator. All over cosine x. Okay, now we know that, that's all over. I almost forgot about the bottom half. That's all over 2, get it right with the pen, Mr. Krellis. That's all over 2 sine x over cosine x. Well, we know that if we divide this term, it's just like multiplying the reciprocal, and we end up getting sine x minus sine x times cosine x all over 2 sine x. Well, if we factor out the sine x, we get sine x and then 1 minus cosine x over 2 sine x. Oh, wait a minute. way of this. These two cancel because they divide out, so they divide to be 1. We're left with 1 minus cosine x over 2, which is what we wanted. Okay, so thank you for bearing with me on the last one. Don't forget to do your summary and your questions. You guys all will be doing the homework in class tomorrow. Have a good day.